In this short solo cast, I talk about my recent experience preparing for and doing a TEDx talk. I speak about how to work with your fear of being seen and in public speaking. I share what flower essences I used and how your body sometimes has a mind of its own and what to do about it.
Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge.
I thought it would be fun to share with you a recent experience that I had speaking at a TEDx event in Phoenix. So I spoke last night. Today is the day of rest afterwards. And I just thought it would be fun to share because it was real challenging. It was a real stretch for me in ways that I didn't expect. And of course, we all like to hear a good story of challenge. So I would say about a month ago, I got selected to be a speaker at this TEDx event. Maybe not even a month. Just look at the calendar. I know I had 3 weeks to prepare. So it actually might have been only 3 weeks ago. I was selected as a finalist. And then they reached out and said, you've been a finalist. You have 2 days to do a version of your talk in 8 minutes. And, at that time, I hadn't really formulated out a talk, nothing was actually solidified for that time frame. So I quickly threw something together. They wanted it in video form, sent it back. And then the very day that I sent it back, they said, you're a finalist. There were 3 speakers at this event in Phoenix. And then they also showed some TED videos during the show. So yeah, I just thought I would share what the whole experience was like. It's so interesting for me. I had read somewhere that for every minute of a TED Talk, you need at least an hour of practice. And so since they had set us at a 15 minute, I had to practice for at least 15 hours. And the whole process of putting it together is so interesting because a TED Talk, it's not memorized or scripted. It's not like every word you've got to memorize, but it's kind of like that because you've got, very specific things you want to say in kind of a specific way, little sound bites. So what I did was I wrote down the main points to Post-it notes and then put it on a piece of cardboard. I had 9 sticky notes. And then that way, if you want to rearrange, which I did several times, I did many times in the first 2 weeks of prep, just moving around the Post-its and thinking is this the best way? What's the best, what should come first in what order? And which elements to leave in, which to leave out, tried different things and based on either how laborious it was to say it or which section felt like it had a lot of my energy or juice in it, keep it. If it didn't, lose it. This is very interesting to put it together, a talk that has such strict frameworks around no ums, uhs, and so, that kind of thing, and the time limit. So what I did was try to blend in science with the flower essence ideas, along with common wisdom or common experience or something that no one can argue with, right? Because it's your own experience. And I would say about a week before, I had pretty much solidified. Well, I still made a few changes. Okay, let's say 5 or so days, maybe 4 days or so before the talk, I solidified, this is exactly what I'm going to say. I know that these are the parts in this order. Even then, till the very last minute, I was kind of making little last minute changes. We had visitors from out of town at the business several days before the talk. So I was super engaged from 9 a.m. until midnight every day that they were here. So that was an interesting process. I kind of got a chance to totally step back and not even think about it for a few days. And then I had Monday and Tuesday to just drill and prepare. And then there was the whole what do you wear nonsense. It's so silly, right? You're well, you want to be taken seriously, but you want to be yourself. You look at your closet, you don't really have the right thing. You go out shopping. Luckily, Taylor came with me. And, you look at a million things and it's wow, they just don't really make the kind of clothing that I want. I want something that's kind of like Japan meets India. And you just don't find that in the US. Something flowy and elegant and beautiful. And then in bright colors, India colors, magenta, indigo, teal, something, really saturated and fun, like a flower. That's funny. So anyway, we're working on our own clothing line very, very, very slowly, but I'll be super excited when that teeny tiny little collection comes out, because it's almost like the kind of clothes I really feel most comfortable in just don't exist. So we've got to make them. Anyway, so we looked at all these different types of clothing, and just, it's so funny because you try on all these things and nothing's really you. I ended up pulling an old shirt out of my closet at the last minute and was like, oh, this will work. This is perfect. So one of the things I wanted to share is that this TED Talk was such a different experience than what I've become used to. I've really, in the last, I would say 2 years, trained myself to go completely no script, right? I have used to teach with a lot of PowerPoints and visuals and visual cues. And then for 2 years, I would lead the Flower Lounge events and really have zero script and really try to speak from absolute spontaneity. And that was a really fun experience to get used to just like look at the crowd and not have any real plan of what I'm going to say and let whatever arises in the moment be what arises in the moment. But a TED or TEDx talk is totally different, right? You kind of want to know exactly what you're going to say precisely, what points you're going to bring up, what's the most important, what your transitions are. Transitions were like the most tricky, I think, between ideas and tying all these different ideas and scientific facts together into an overall picture that makes sense. And that's also like applicable and actionable and activates people and catalyzes them into doing something different. Because the last thing I want to do is just be like entertainment or like a cool idea, and then everyone goes back home and goes back to their normal self. Like I want this to actually change, like plant a seed in someone's heart that maybe they'll look at a flower differently, or maybe they'll spend more time in nature. Maybe they'll try flower remedies, but if not, they might think about their own state of mind differently. So it's like crafting everything so that it's actually impactful and moving and touching in some way, but in this kind of tight framework. And then there's the whole like being seen thing, right? So this is the part that I find the most challenging, I would say, and probably a lot of you can relate. Like the idea of a TEDx talk is that it will be uploaded eventually to the TEDx website where, other folks can, it's connected to TED. And everyone's goal is to make their talks go viral. And you don't really know who, if anyone, will see your talk. So, but it adds this element of sort of high pressure, feels like the high stakes. You're standing in a spotlight on a red dot carpet, the camera's in your face. I mean, not really in your face, but it's a different vibe than, say, like organizing your own event and inviting folks into your own world or your sphere. And interestingly, for Americans, public speaking is our number one fear. I found several lists online, from Washington Post to Psychology Today magazine, different lists of things that our Americans are afraid of. I found one quote from a Toastmasters website that says, public speaking is listed as Americans' number one fear, before death at number 5 and loneliness at number 7. So apparently we as Americans are more afraid of public speaking than dying, which is kind of amazing, probably because we just avoid thinking about death. So we don't even have enough time to be afraid of it. But in every resource I look at, the things that we're afraid of may differ slightly, but public speaking is always number one, which I find so interesting. And that's always been a huge fear of mine, being seen and heard. And public speaking, I remember when I first started teaching, my knees used to shake. I'd be like so nervous before I had to teach a class. So I've been teaching now for almost 20 years, classes, workshops, been in front of groups. I do remember several years ago when I had to pitch my business idea as part of an incubator program called Seed Spot here in Phoenix. We had to do a 3-minute pitch in front of 1,000 people. That was stressful. 1,000 to me, it was in the Orpheum. It was just like so many people. So I used inner peace like every 5 minutes before I went on stage. And I think my voice was even like, so it's real. And it's this, really funny kind of, it's almost like uncontrollable. It's almost like even though you don't want to be nervous, you're a little nervous, which I find really interesting. It's like kind of uncontrollable and irrational. So yeah, so I practiced a lot. The last 2 days before the talk, I just pretty much wiped almost all of my calendar free, except for 1 or 2 things, so that I could 100% devote my energy to that. And when it came time to actually do the talk, we had one dry run on stage. That went really well. And then once the place was full and we actually were doing the real deal, it was so funny because then like all these little things like the clicker, that moves the slides forward, it was like sticky. So I would have to press it like 3 or 4 times to get the slide to advance. And sometimes the visual cue was what I needed to sort of like jumpstart me into what I was going to say. And so that was really tricky. And then there was a moment where I think one of the slides got skipped, right? Because you're like click, 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 trying to get it to move forward. And then it boop, boop, like hopped over one. And then a cell phone rang. And I'm like, I'm not bothered by cell phones. And it kept ringing. And then I sort of like had to pause for a minute. And then I picked it back up and the ending was a little bit different. I threw in some kind of new piece of a new way of saying something kind of at the last minute. So it threw off the usual ending. Things are always different than you imagine them to be, and nothing's ever perfect. It's all perfectly imperfect. But overall, it was a super fun experience. And I think what's just most fascinating about it is that there are elements to this type of experience that are just so, how should I say? I don't want to say uncontrollable or irrational, but it's like they may have their roots in our subconscious in ways that we don't even understand. Like, for example, this is not in any way like an excuse or anything, but I don't know, could have gotten killed in a past life for speaking the truth. And so you just don't even know why little things make you nervous. I went into it just thinking, I am just going to have fun. This is going to be so fun. And I'm not going to get nervous. And then when push comes to shove, your body just does weird things. Like, my neck muscles seized up and my back felt weird. It's almost like involuntary. And I also noticed a very interesting phenomenon. About 3 days before the talk, I experienced like this extraordinary amount of fear, just an everyday experience. And I noted that. Felt like some sort of purification of old fear, kind of that needed to happen before I would get on stage, which is interesting. And who knows why we can't control these reactions that we have. So I thought I would share with you the flower essences that I worked with leading up to the TED Talk. And maybe you could find that helpful for any sort of public speaking that you need to do or experiences that throw you out of your comfort zone. So the 2 weeks leading up to the talk, I worked with wild delphinium, the single elixir, and trumpet vine. You could also use truth teller, but I just took those 2 elixirs. I also took radiant energy to help keep my body clear and free of, keep my immune system strong. And jade succulent is in radiant energy, which is for having a more powerful presence. And I didn't put this in the regular mix, but I thought about this flower just now because it's such a helpful one. And that's Hong Kong orchid. And that's found in infinite love. And that's for deeply accepting every part of you and having more fearlessness around being seen and heard. That would have been a good one for me to throw in there too. And then I noticed right before, the day of the actual talk, the ones that I was most gravitating towards were just like the pure survival flower essences. We have sort of our tiers, our 1.0 and our 2.0. And the first 6 blends are like survival, just stabilization, right? And the second 6 are more like digging in deeper. And so I was more on a survival mode. So I was working with joy juice and inner peace and quiet mind, trying to get my muscles to relax and feel more grounded and calm and just enjoy the process. And yeah, so it was a ton of fun. I loved the whole experience. And it was so cool to put myself so far out of my comfort zone. You'd think after so many years of teaching that just getting up in front of people and talking about what I love would be easy. And in some ways it was. In some ways I was totally calm and in my element. And in other ways, it almost felt like some sort of involuntary stress that I couldn't really control. And that night, so after, oh my gosh, I should also share. So after it was over, I just had this really strange sensation in my body, just like extreme fatigue. And we went to get something to eat, and then we just crashed out on the floor. Taylor was pretty crashed too, which I find interesting. And anyway, I went home and I was so exhausted. I just went right to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to do my meditation, and then I fell back to sleep. And then somewhere in mid-morning, I had this dream about my dog that died last year. And I was just woke up feeling really missing her. And I thought, how bizarre. Something is connected to something very deep inside of me. Like, we don't know how all these things are connected, right? Like, I think maybe some of you may have read an article that I wrote about meditation some years ago. about unraveling knots. And there are like these little knots in our psyche that meditation and flower essences help us unravel. And these little knots are sort of connected to each other in really weird ways. You can imagine as like knots in your fascia or knots in a piece of fabric, and you pull on one string and then it pulls the other strings a little. So I was so curious this morning, actually, when I went to sit in meditation, I had this moment of, 2 minutes where I just sort of crumpled down and cried. And it's not that there was any reason to feel sad. There was no apparent reason why. I was just experiencing raw emotion, just like bleh, tumbled out of me. I thought, wow, so interesting how tender I am after this experience that seemed like it shouldn't have been a big deal. And so I'm more in awe of the fact that there's so many things in our psyche that we don't understand, right? And if you believe in reincarnation, there is information stored in our body relating to past life experiences that, past, present, future, it's kind of all the same in some ways. Even though we don't have a memory, there's a part of us that has a memory, and our body may have a memory of things. And how bizarre that this seemingly mundane, give a 15-minute talk, put a little pressure on that it has to be perfect because many people might see it one day, and how that can be connected to other little things inside of you, and why we may be tender about something, and how far back does it actually go. So just another reason to develop compassion for oneself, because we don't really have all the pieces of the puzzle all the time. We don't know sometimes why we are the way we are. We don't know why different emotions bubble up, or why things become more stressful than apparently they should. And so curiosity is so important, right? Curiosity, observation, looking at yourself with curiosity, looking at what arises with curiosity, and tenderness and compassion, softness. And if any of you ever go on to do any sort of talk like this, happy to share tips, but I think that's everything. The flower essences were super helpful in helping me be prepared. Oh, and the other one I used is the new blend. I used that quite a lot. Expansive presence. I used that several times a day leading up. All-time favorite for now anyway. So I wanted to share this as encouragement to step out of your comfort zone, to take risks, to do things that are scary, to do things that are seemingly mundane, but then in the end seem like they're scary, but you don't understand why they're scary, but they're scary. And just to do those things that pull your trigger a little bit, that tweak you out, to go after it, and then just observe with curiosity and compassion. And use flower essences, right? Oh, the other one that I was totally enamored with. Okay, mountain laurel. I brought that up in my presentation because I felt like it was a flower that everyone needed to hear about and that everyone would resonate with. And that's about feeling good in your own skin. And mountain laurel's an inner peace. And that flower was blooming right outside the theater. It only blooms for 1 or 2 weeks in Arizona, and it has the most divine scent, like lilacs and wine and grapes. But it's a really rare flower here. I mean, it's like blooming season is even shorter than lilacs. And it was blooming right outside the theater. So Taylor and I went and buried our faces in it before the show. That's another good flower. And to know that Mother Nature's always got your back. And everything ultimately is fine. So take this as words of encouragement to put yourself out on the limb, to take risks, to speak up, to speak out, to put yourself on stage, to put yourself in the spotlight, to have the courage to screw up or be vulnerable or be seen or have people think you're crazy or, whatever those irrational fears are. It's quite fun and it's quite a rush to look all of that in the face, because ultimately you're really just looking at yourself in your own face.
Thank you so much for listening to The Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.